Hello everybody! Welcome back to another Mototherapy session. Today we are going to be talking about what is fear and how to deal with it. So today we're going to be talking about three things as always. So first, what is fear? Secondly, what can we do about it? And third, what are the consequences of dealing with our fear or not dealing with our fear and anxiety? Guys. So first, what is fear? So fundamentally, fear is just a perception. It is just a sense. It's just a thing that we have in our brain to protect us. So I'm not going to get too much into the science of it, but I did study this in college. I did study psychology, so I can absolutely go into the science of it. But for the purposes of this, we're going to keep it pretty basic. So essentially we have our thinking brain, our high brain, and we have our low brain or our lizard brain. And fear is just a primal sense. It is just something that is there to help protect us. Fear is there to ward us away from danger. It's something that can help preserve ourselves. So fear could be something like looking at something as a threat. So like a tiger, a bear, an animal that can harm us and kill us. Or it can be something like walking near a cliff, to protect us from falling over the edge. It can be a fear of, insects or spiders, things that can hurt us. So there's a number of different fears or phobias that we all have, and these all kind of trigger stress and anxiety and a number of other different types of responses. But fundamentally, fear is a protection mechanism. It is something that we all, or the vast majority of humans have, unless you have a very unique wiring in your brain. But fear is something, for the most part, that every single person has, and it is there to protect us and to make sure that we stay alive. So, because it's a self-preservation mechanic, that doesn't necessarily mean it's something to avoid, or that it's something that is bad. Fear is actually a good thing. Fear protects us. Without fear, we would be doing things much more recklessly, and, we may end up hurting ourselves or end up killing ourselves because of something that was actually a valid danger to us. Sometimes we attribute way too much power to our fears. Fear in itself is a good thing, but sometimes we blow things out of proportion. We let fear hold us back from things that we should be concerned about, but not necessarily fearful of. We're oftentimes afraid of things that trigger that response that won't actually cause any physical harm to us. So an example might be, I'm afraid to ask my boss for that promotion because of what they might say or because of that rejection. There's no physical harm. There's nothing that is going to physically harm us or kill us in that scenario, but that response can still get triggered in social settings. So oftentimes we still are afraid of certain things, even though it won't physically hurt us at all. So this could be like asking somebody out, that fear of rejection, trying something new, that fear of failure. So oftentimes we let fear hold us back, and much more often than the case, we will sometimes blow things out of proportion. We'll make things seem much more worse than they actually are. So the fear itself kind of manifests itself and extrapolates itself into something much worse than it actually is. And then it can turn into that self-feeding cycle of fear perpetuating fear, and then that can hold us back and, in some cases, even paralyze us from doing what we logically know is the right thing to do, or something that we want to do, but again, we can sometimes let that fear hold us back. So we're going to talk about some strategies on what you can do to basically understand what your fear is and what you can do to help get around it and to not let it control you. So that way you can embrace and do things that you want to do. That way you can really challenge yourself and that you can be brave, right? That's kind of our motto, is to be brave, to really challenge ourselves and to do different things. So first, it starts with just understanding what fear is. It's just a sense, it's a good thing. It's not something to be afraid of. It's not something to avoid. It's not something to let control you, but it is something to be aware about. And there's a number of different strategies that you can utilize to help control that fear. So if you're experiencing a fearful response where like you're nervous, you're short of breath, it's physically paralyzing you, it's preventing you from doing things that you want to do, there's a number of different strategies that you can do. There are different things that are going to work for different people. The first thing that I always recommend you do, and this is something that works especially well for myself, whenever there's something I'm nervous about doing or concerned about, the first thing you do is just take a deep breath and continue to take deep breaths as you need to. Breathing is going to be one of those things that helps calm, and deep breaths, not shallow, hyperventilating breaths. Take slow, controlled, deep breaths. That's going to be one of the first things you can do to slow down your heart rate, to kind of shut down that lizard brain, that low thinking brain, that primal brain, and let your thinking brain start to take over again. So breathe, slow breaths, inhale for 3 seconds, hold it for a second, exhale for 3 seconds. There's a graphic that I love to do. It shows a bunch of shapes kind of growing and then shrinking back down, growing and shrinking back down. That's one of my favorite things to look at if I'm trying to focus my breathing. So you breathe in as the shapes get bigger, and then you exhale as the shapes get smaller. So simply just breathing, and you'll be surprised at how well just calming down, focusing on your breathing kind of starts to remove some of that anxiety. It calms down your body. It stops that physiological response to fear and anxiety. And it'll help you get control back of what you want to do. So whenever I have a really big important meeting or a call or have a difficult conversation or I'm going to try something different, or if I was in a near accident, like in my car or even on a motorcycle, if something happens and I'm getting that flight or fight response or I'm getting that fearful response, I just stop, focus on my breathing for 2 seconds, and then that helps me regain control. And that helps me keep my head in the right space, so that way I'm not operating on fear. Because when we're operating on fear, that means our primal brain is taking control, and we're not letting our thinking brain really take control. The second thing that you can do is what's called mindfulness. To put it simply, mindfulness is really just about being in the moment. It's about focusing your thoughts on what you are feeling, what you are thinking, and really just being in the moment. Oftentimes, our fear is future-based. We're thinking about what could possibly happen. We're thinking about what could happen, what's going to happen. What's up, guys? And we're not focusing on the here and now. And so that's where mindfulness can be very helpful. We're focusing in on, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm feeling, and literally just labeling it. I'm fearful of this because of this, right? I'm feeling stressed, I am feeling anxious, I am feeling nervous. My heart rate is very high. And just labeling what you're feeling, labeling what you're thinking. And for me, and Tiny Tater, my wife, oftentimes it helps us to write these things down. When you put it onto paper, it starts to become more real, and it helps you get more control and organized over all the different things that may be going on. So practicing mindfulness, being in the here and now, not worrying about the past, not worrying about the future, just calming yourself and focusing on the present. There's a ton of books and resources on mindfulness, and sometimes it works for me. Sometimes it works very well if I need something more than just breathing. But there's a ton of resources on how to do it, and you can really start to master mindfulness, and it's a very, very strong technique. And there's a number of different ways that you can utilize mindfulness, so I'm not going to be talking in depth about every single thing that you can do to practice mindfulness, but just know that that is a very strong technique that you can utilize. And this is also where it helps to document down what you are fearful of and why are you fearful of it. Sometimes it's just a reaction. There's not really a good reason to be fearful of something. And sometimes that's where it helps to break down the source of the fear and the logic part of your brain. And sometimes you can realize there's really no good reason to be fearful of something. And sometimes that can help you overcome and get past that fear. It also helps to document, and for me, whoa, dude, going wide. Or not going wide, but cutting that corner. A little dangerous there. So while you're facing your fear, one of the most important things that I would recommend you do is to focus on the positive outcomes. So have a reason for facing your fear. If you don't have a good reason to face your fear, it's going to make it pretty difficult to face your fear. So I recommend have a goal, have an outcome planned in your mind or written down. Have a reason for facing your fear. And keep that reason in mind. Keep reminding yourself, why am I going through the discomfort of trying to build myself and trying to face my fear? Why am I trying to do that? And this will also kind of lead us into our third point of the consequences of fear. And consequences can be both good and bad. So you can even frame it as outcomes of fear or consequences of fear. But we're going to talk about the consequences of action. So consequences of getting past your fear and doing something about it despite the fear. And we'll also talk about the consequences of letting the fear control you. So if it's stopping you from doing something, what are the consequences of that? What are the consequences of letting that fear control you? Well, depending on what the fear is and the source of the fear, sometimes not doing anything isn't going to have that big of a consequence, right? You're just going to carry on the same way you've always carried on. Nothing's really going to change. You may not improve. Things may not get worse. So sometimes the consequences of inaction is you're staying on par. Sometimes the consequences of inaction are you're going to continue to suffer. It's going to hold you back from doing certain things that you want to do. You can pick a number of examples that you want to do, but it's not hard to conceptualize letting fear control you. And fear will often seep into other facets of our lives. If we're regretting not doing something because of fear, that's going to subconsciously also hold us back from doing other things that we may want to do but might be fearful of, right? We get comfortable letting it hold us back. We get comfortable not doing something even though we really want to, and then that becomes regret, right? And I want to encourage you not to live a life full of regret. I'd rather you live a life of trying to do something and have it not work out, but learn from that lesson and realize, okay, I tried a thing, I did my best, and it might not have worked out. Alternatively, there can be very positive and good consequences of going through and doing something despite that fear. So, like, we'll say just like asking somebody out on a date, right? There can be that fear of rejection, but let's say we let fear hold us back, right? So we don't ask that person out on a date. Well, now we're going to be wondering, well, what if I did? And would they have said yes? Or would they have said no? So now we're left wondering what would have happened. And that can lead us down any number of different paths. And then we can also be feeling guilty of not asking that person and feeling bad because, I'm so weak, or I should have just asked them out, or I wish I did that, I wish I was stronger, I wish I could just be brave and just go out and do that and ask them out. So now we're kind of attacking ourselves for not doing something. Or alternatively, we be brave and we take the risk and we go through despite that fear of rejection and ask them out. Now, they might still say no, not interested, and so then we just kind of suck it up and deal with it at that point. But now we know, okay, they said no, and that's okay, but I was brave, and now I know for sure that they weren't interested, versus left wondering and then feeling that regret. Now we know we faced the fear, and we can be proud of the fact that we faced our fear. We were uncomfortable, but we went through it anyway, and now we have an answer, and we can move on with our lives, right? We're not leaving a life full of regret, but we can be proud of the fact, despite the fact that they said no and it wasn't the outcome we were hoping for, we can be proud of the fact that we went through it despite it. So the positive outcome of that is obviously they say yes, and now we're elated, we're happy, and obviously in that case, it was very worthwhile to ask them out. because they said yes, and so we're happy, and then we can move forward and, you know, go on a date and yada yada yada. But that never would have happened if you never asked them out, if you never faced that fear. So there can be there can be steady state, nothing happens, nothing really, we just move on with the lives as is, nothing really changes. Or we can face our fear and do something and have an outcome and have either a positive or a negative consequence from that. In my opinion, I would much rather face my fear and fail rather than let the fear control me and not do something and then just be left wondering. I would always rather know the outcome, know the result of something, than be left wondering, what if I did this? Because sometimes those opportunities only come up once and you just got to take advantage of it. You can't let that fear hold you back. And by no means is facing your fear comfortable. Even despite knowing everything and having a wealth of experience, facing your fear is always going to be uncomfortable. Because that's your lizard brain fighting against you. You're literally having an internal struggle and fighting against yourself. And sometimes you just gotta say, F it, I'm just gonna do it. And just throw caution to the wind and go for it. And if it works out, great. If not, oh well, you learn from it and you got better at facing your fear. You can treat facing your fear like a muscle. The first time it might be really hard, it might be really strenuous, and you might want to practice facing smaller fears rather than this big giant fear, right? So if you have a fear of spiders as an example, maybe don't just jump to holding a giant tarantula in your hands, right? First, maybe look at pictures of spiders, small spiders. Then maybe look at pictures of tarantulas, and then maybe watch some videos of spiders. And then as you get more and more and more comfortable with facing your fear, then you can maybe move on to something where you can actually handle a spider. Just as an example. So maybe start small, figure out different ways to face your fear and be able to build up a resistance to that fear if it is something that you want to overcome. If it's a social situation, like asking for that promotion at work, maybe don't just jump into asking for that promotion, but instead start small with asking for small things. So like asking for help at a grocery store if you feel uncomfortable doing that, or asking for small favors from other people, asking for favors from friends who are very likely going to say yes and be in that safe environment, and then maybe move on to asking for favors from strangers, right? Asking for help from somebody in different situations. There's a number of different ways you can handle it. So have a good reason and keep telling yourself, this is why I'm going to be doing it. Focus on the positive outcomes. Oftentimes it's far, far too easy to focus on the negative outcomes. What's up, guys? And those negative outcomes, again, we can perpetuate those fears. We can perpetuate those negative outcomes in our mind versus just focusing on the positive outcomes and trying to make that our anchor, trying to make that our focus, our focal point. So if you're trying to get over the fear of spiders, the arachnophobia, keep telling yourself, I don't want to be paralyzed by fear whenever I see a spider. Or I want to be able to go camping and spiders might be something I face, right? So have a goal in mind, have an anchor, and focus on those positive outcomes. And be aware of the negative consequences of that could possibly happen, right? So my boss, in the instance of asking for that promotion, my boss might say no, and in which case, okay, then I continue on with the job I have. Or they might say no, and here's why, but if you do want to get that promotion, these are going to be the things that you need to do to get there. So even though in the immediate instance it being a no, and then we feel pretty bad, the positive outcomes are we have a better route or we have a better roadmap to understand how we can get that promotion. So even if they say no, even if there's negative outcomes, there can still be some positive things that come out of going through those uncomfortable experiences. And that's one kind of philosophy I have in life, where nothing is ever black and white. It's always shades of gray, right? Nothing is ever truly 100% bad. Nothing is ever truly 100% good. There's always degrees of freedom between those two. So in a bad scenario, there's always some good there's always some good outcomes that can come out of that. And in a good thing, there's always going to be some bad or some consequences, some negatives as a result of those good things. So nothing's ever 100% good or 100% bad, so it's always good just to keep that in mind as well. But I encourage you all to focus on the positives. Focus on the good things that could happen if you continue to face your fear and challenge yourself and be brave. Understand what are the bad things that could happen, because sometimes we blow those out of proportion, and the worst thing that happens is we continue on with our lives as we normally did. So at that point, why wouldn't you go through the fear? Why wouldn't you challenge yourself? Why wouldn't you try to do something that you're scared to do if the worst thing is you continue on exactly the same as you did before? So at that point, you got nothing to lose. So go for it. Why not? Challenge yourself. And this is where it helps to really, again, practice that mindfulness, take a deep breath, write down everything, label everything, and really think through what are all the different outcomes that could happen. Because if there's got nothing to lose, then then you're just arbitrarily letting fear control you for no good reason. So some of the points I'm touching on today, I also talk about in the Focus on What is in Your Control Mototherapy session. So I'll link to that down in the description, and I'll also put the annotation up in the corner. So if you found this topic very interesting, that may be another topic that I recommend you go and watch, as it kind of goes through some similar scenarios, but from a different perspective. So for me, I can say the times where I have been the most afraid of something have most commonly been the times where I had my biggest triumphs. So the things that I was most concerned about in terms of like changing my job, asking out Tiny Tater when we were in high school, really, even thinking about riding a motorcycle, these are all things that had massive turning points in my life. And if I just let fear hold me back and say, no, I'm just going to play it safe, or I'm just going to do what I've always done, or if I automatically wrote off all the outcomes without actually going through it, I wouldn't be in the situation I'm in now, and I can pretty confidently say I would not be as happy as I am today. So some of the times where I've experienced the most fear have led to the biggest triumphs and led me to be who I am today, and had the most significant learning opportunities for me. And the things that I was fearful of 10 years ago, I don't even blink at. And that's just because of time and practice and patience, and really just continuously facing my fears and building that muscle. So I'm curious, what are some of the things that you're afraid of? What are some of the things that you would like to try and work on? For me, some of the things that I struggle with is still conflict. I do not like conflict at all. And I have a very difficult time with conflict. And so some of the things that I would like to try and work on more is being able to have like a healthy conflict with someone and not feel so guilty about it, or not be so afraid of how they're going to react. But sometimes, that conflict is I need to say no to somebody, or I'll say I can't do that for you. So those are some of the things that's a good example of probably my top fear and top thing that I struggle with. So I'd be curious, leave them in the comments down below. What are some of the things that you struggle with in terms of fear and anxiety? What are some of the things that hold you back? And maybe we can provide some strategies to each other in terms of how to help each other through it. All right, everybody. So that'll about wrap it up for today. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to go ahead and click that like button. Leave a comment down below in terms of what you found most valuable. And how are you going to apply anything that you learned today? If you like what you saw, don't forget to go ahead and click that subscribe button so that way you don't miss my future videos. I upload every Friday. And with that, I encourage you all to be brave, do good, and take care of yourselves. Have a great day, everybody. See you on the next one.